Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday night, and I am so delighted to have you back tonight for book talk, especially because I have my talented friend, Jaime Jo Wright here. These are her amazing books. And I got to tell you, her first novel won an even bigger award than my first novel did, because with her very first one, The House on Foster Hill, she won the Christy Award, which is the largest award in Christian fiction. And if you haven't discovered her split time novels, which have suspense and a very gothic environmental feel to them, then you are going to love getting to know her tonight. So Jaime, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Jaime Jo Wright's my name, and I'm from Wisconsin. I live in the woods, classic spooky woods scenario, and the name of my road is Shady Lane. So everything about me is gothic. I was homeschooled. I was extremely socialized and very outgoing. I've been an extrovert my whole life, which is not normal for a writer. And but I grew up loving mysteries and loving history, and I always would go through. I was
Oh,
homeschooled.
sorry.
No, it's okay. I would go through antique stores and I'd see things and wonder what was the story behind it, like who had actually touched this mirror or this vase or this teacup. And my brain would start working on the stories of the past and how they would affect the present. And so that's kind of where I've come from. And that's sort of the stories that I write now is mysteries from the past and how they influence the present. And yeah, I've been doing it since 2017, I think, is when The House on Foster Hill came out.
So you have written a lot of books,
Mhm.
and or I shouldn't say you've written them all in that time period because of the publishing delay,
Right.
but you've had a lot of books that have come out, and your most recent one that just released is On the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor.
Mhm.
And I gotta tell y'all, it is almost spooky in the way that it's so gothic and atmospheric. So how did you come up with the idea for this one?
Okay, so Foxglove Manor was a conglomeration of things. It started with my daughter, who at the time was 10, and she was absolutely in love with the show on the History Channel called The Curse of the Civil War Gold. And she made me, I shouldn't say made me because I love those types of shows. So we sat down and she says, Mom, you've got to watch this. This is great. They're treasure hunting for gold. And it took the unusual, unexpected twist of an episode where they were actually on Lake Superior, or was it Lake Michigan? One of the lakes. And they were looking for Civil War gold that had been supposedly smuggled from the South through the Great Lakes and had been lost in the Great Lakes, basically lost at sea, except it's freshwater. So that led me onto this journey to start going Civil War gold in the Great Lakes from the
Yeah.
South. Like, what? That didn't make any sense to me. And I thought, this is a really glamorized historical television show. But as I started studying, there was a huge Confederate influence around the Great Lakes. And there was also a huge Union influence. It was like they merged. So there was a Confederate prisoner of war camp on Lake Erie that was run by the Union soldiers, and there was an escape from there, and some of those Confederate soldiers got out and escaped on the lakes. A lot of Southern goods were smuggled through the Great Lakes to Canada for safekeeping. People from Canada were being recruited to fight for the Confederacy. There was a lot of secret societies and tunnels and treasures, and some of it's been proven, some of it's still that legendary, did it really happen, because it was so secretive. So it just really ballooned from this one television show that we watched. And then I love Regency and I love Jane Eyre, and I always wanted to write something sort of like that, but I thought, what if you had that feeling but 20 years after the war? So that really dark, kind of
Yeah.
spooky post-war atmospheric, but there's a treasure. And so I put this house on a cliff up at Lake Superior, and then I just let my imagination go. And that's kind of where it came from. Long explanation.
But I think that there is something about, because I mean, you and I've talked as you were writing this book.
Right.
So I knew it was based in history,
Mm-hmm.
but I had the same reaction you did. Civil War, that far up in on the Great Lakes. Now,
Right.
Mackinac Island had some Confederate prisoners of war and
Mhm.
things like that, but
Mhm.
you don't really expect it to be that far north.
No, you
So,
don't.
what was the strangest thing you had to research as you were writing this book?
Oh, there was a lot of strange things, but honestly, a lot of it was really the amount of Southern influence on the Great Lakes and how the Great Lakes, they were often referred to as the inland sea
Hmm.
because with the five Great Lakes all interconnected, they became this channel for both the Union and the Confederacy. But the interesting part, that was probably the most intriguing, was learning about a town that is just, it's more on Lake Michigan than it was on Lake Superior. But I did steal some ideas from it, where this banker in the town, and it was set in Michigan. I can't remember. My daughter would tell you the name of the town right off the top of her head. But he actually built a house that had a series of secret tunnels, and some of the tunnels went out to the actual shore of Lake Michigan, so they could smuggle things in to his basement, which would then get smuggled into the basement of his bank, into the vaults. And they've actually been doing
Wow.
archaeological research on it, and they're finding evidence of these tunnels and finding evidence of old maps and a secret Confederate society, which I allude to in the book, did actually exist. And they don't know a lot about it because they know it existed, but it was so secret. They're not quite sure who was in it and how long it ran after the war, because they fully intend to not lose the war. And so when the war ended, there was a huge movement around the Great Lakes to try to re-engage, which obviously failed because we never had another civil war, but they weren't giving up the fight for many years after.
Wow. So we've got a question over here. Is it Knights of the Golden Round Table or something like that?
Um, I never found a name for the secret society. It's just been called the Secret Society of the Confederacy, Knights of the Round Table. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, that's so funny. So as I'm reading the comments as they're coming in, a lot of people are talking about how they just really enjoy your books. And
Oh,
so
great.
Joyce talked about how your first one, The House on Foster Hill, was her favorite. And she also says she only reads your books during daylight hours. And
I get
Linda,
that a lot.
yeah,
I
and
get that a lot.
it is, there are, and when I say they're spooky, I don't mean they're spooky in like a Stephen King way or a Dean
Right.
Koontz way where,
Right.
only read it at your own risk. I
Right.
mean that you've got this really tightly written plot with
Hmm.
a lot going on, as we could tell, just as you're describing the inspiration for it. But then also the setting is just really intriguing. I mean, like in this one, it's this old house that feels like it should be set in Regency
Yeah.
England with
Hmm.
all the tunnels and everything.
Hmm.
And on this spooky edge of a cliff where there's all kinds of things that happen. And so, what comes first for you? Is it the location? Is it that germ of an idea, like finding that History Channel show? Is it a character? Or does it change with every book?
It does kind of change with every book. I'll be honest. So the setting for Foxglove Manor was adopted because of the story that I found in research, and then you can kind of let your imagination go. But then the other book that I wrote, The Haunting of Bonaventure Circus, I grew up in the hometown of the Ringling Brothers, and the Ringling Brothers Circus is in my backyard. And everywhere I go, it's Ringling Brothers Circus. I grew up going to the circus, riding the elephants. And so I always wanted to do a book that was set in a circus setting. And so for that one, it was just the setting started the story. And then I started trying to think what might happen. And so it kind of comes and goes. A lot of it has to do with, it usually starts with a crime, honestly. There's something in my brain that's like something happened, and then it's finding the right setting and finding the right history to weave in and out to make this crime be something that can last for centuries or decades or however long the time is in between.
And that's an important point. Beverly said that this is one of her favorite books of yours too, The
Okay.
Haunting of the Circus, because her great-grandfather had also run away and joined a circus. And so kind of
Yeah.
connection to history.
Uh-huh.
But, as you're talking about it, it kind of depends, and it all kind of has to come together. Every book's different. And
Mhm.
so has there been one that you just really struggled with coming up with how it was all gonna fit together and be connected?
Probably, I'm going to say the second one that I wrote, The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond,
Mhm.
because the setting for that was a made up town. So there wasn't any historical town that I even based it on. It was really fully from my imagination. And the only thing that was coming out of it was the big tent revival type concepts. And I was pulling from historical research at the time, but they were surrounding people and surrounding events, not so much of a setting. And so, because my books, the setting is almost another character, I had to be really precise in how I could make the area a character when it really wasn't a place at all. The circus, I could base it off the circus. Lake Superior, I can base it off of Lake Superior. An old creepy house, that's not hard to imagine. An old abandoned asylum isn't hard to imagine. But this was just a town. It's just a town with a local newspaper and two revivalists that come to town and raise Cain. And so, how do I make this town real? So it was finding a piece in the town, like a pond, and having events happen around that, and then building kind of out from that. I would say that was probably the most difficult. But even then, it still kind of quickly became its own story and its own person too. So,
Yeah, and that's something that's, I guess, not necessarily unique. There are a lot of split time novels right now, but
mhm,
what makes yours feel more unique is that there's that thread connecting the historical
mhm,
to the contemporary, and there's often it's a crime or something like that that's kind of connecting them across time. So
right.
which comes first for you? Or again, it could change by book. Is
Mhm,
it the contemporary thread, or like I think with the cliffs of Foxgrove Manor, it's probably the historical thread that
right.
came first. Is that
Right.
consistent, or does it change based on the book?
Yeah, that one's pretty consistently. I'll get the historical thread first. Now, I might the part of the historical thread that I'll get first isn't necessarily the characters, but it's usually the event that's going to catapult the story forward. So, the house on Foster Hill, it started. I actually listened to a podcast, and in Great Britain during the war, actually World War II, there was a woman's body found in a hollowed out tree that to this day has never been identified. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting if there was that story, but set in the United States? So I did that with the house on Foster Hill, and that was where the historical story came from. Um, and then it's kind of been that way a little bit with each one of them as I've gone forward. However, interestingly enough, with The Reckoning at Gossamer Pond, which was the second book, I knew what I wanted the historical story to be, the catapult, but it was the contemporary story that I actually saw first in my head. Like, I saw how it would get solved, but not how it would evolve. I always look at the historical as the evolution of the crime and the present as the solving. And so there's the foreshadowing, and then there's the actual events and the conclusions. And so with that one, I actually got the conclusions first, and I was like, okay, wait, I got to figure out how this even started.
Yeah, and that's kind of that can kind of flip it on its
It
head.
can, it can.
Often I'll be at the end and going, I think I know how it happened. I think I know who did it.
Hmm.
Did it actually happen that way?
Hmm.
And so that can be kind of nerve wracking when you're trying to work your way backwards or you get
Right.
in the middle. Um, so, what's your favorite technique for kind of kicking the story off again when you hit that middle?
I usually know it's the middle when I'm starting to get bored. Because I know that I've done the setup. Okay. The crime's been committed. People are searching. And now I can either just belabor this or literally let's get the story going. And so I typically at that point in the middle, to catapult it forward, will put the characters in some almost an extreme situation, that is suddenly really threatening, whether it's threatening to their life or their sanity, or it's just eerie and scary enough where it's threatening, I'll do something kind of dramatic and I'll do it paralleling in both stories. So at the same time, the historical heroine is coming to this climax of fear. So the present day heroine is as well. So their stories are paralleling kind of at the same pace. And then they keep going and they get faster and faster as they culminate to the end. And so that's usually what happens toward the middle is some big incident's going to happen that's going to get them into a lot of trouble.
So that raises another question for me. Do you write all of the historical and then all of the contemporary, or do you write kind of scene by scene going back and forth between the two?
I write exactly the way you read it. So
Okay.
the way you read it is how I write it. It's like a movie in my head by the time I sit down and actually write. So I'm writing actually scenes that I'm seeing people in my head moving and talking, and I can hear the scores of the music and the different things going on. It's all in my head. And so I try as best as I can to get the movie out of my head onto a piece of paper. Now, the Bonaventure Circus was different because I did actually write that book before The House on Foster Hill. And it was a historical suspense novel that I had pitched to Bethany House that they had turned down. And then after I got The House on Foster Hill, we got a few books in, we revived it, but we made it into a split time. So that was harder for me because the historical story was already written and it was a full length 100,000 word novel. So I had to cut about 50,000 words out of that, plus then add in and figure out a contemporary story to complement. And so that one was actually trickier for me. So I found out very quickly I didn't want to write them separately. I wanted to write them in a row.
Yeah, well, having the challenge of pruning down this story, which at some level would be like a baby because it's your
Right.
first book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then so you're giving her a huge weight loss.
Hmm.
And then you're having to add in, that is challenging.
Yeah.
That would be stretching.
Yeah. It was stretching, and it was stretching because when I wrote it, I didn't have any intention of ever having a contemporary element. So I had to try and figure out how the crime could go unsolved because it wasn't ever written to be unsolved. It was written to be concluded in the historical. But if it's concluded in the historical, then there's nothing for the present day person to do. And so I had to unsolve it in history and resolve it in the contemporary and make that believable somehow. So that was definitely challenging.
Yeah, that would be a real stretch. And we
Yeah.
all kind of get our ways that we like to write our books. And
Mhm.
so when that process gets disruptive, it can either kind of ignite creativity or it can actually kind of smother it.
Right.
So when you get to write the book in exactly the way that you want to, what do you like to do? What's kind of your process?
Oh gosh. Well, I do a lot of thinking. I call my writing the book is 2/3 thinking and 1/3 writing. So I love to dwell on every scene and the process of how the story unfolds. It's basically like I watch the movie 3 or 4 times in my head over the course of a couple months. And then over the course of maybe 6 or 8 weeks, I sit down and actually get it out on paper. Um, Not always ideal because sometimes you're really crunching to get all the writing in because it feels like you've procrastinated. But if I didn't sit there and watch the movie so long in my head, it wouldn't work on paper, which is it's hard because I've had people ask me what my system is, and I'm kind of like I probably wouldn't recommend it for most people, but
Yeah.
that's really my ideal. I love to stew. I love to stew.
Yeah, let the characters and the
Yeah.
ideas just kind of work in your
Hmm.
head. And
And then I'll grab research books. I'm trying to think the book I'm writing right now. I don't want to give too much away, but
I know it involves poison because you grabbed that book instead of your Bible for church on Sunday.
yeah, that was a mistake. I accidentally grabbed my book of poisons and took it to church thinking it was my Bible. That was a difficult one to answer when I walked into children's church with a book of poisons under my arm, but everyone survived. It was good.
Yeah. But I mean, we do reach a point when we're writing where part of our thoughts are kind of always on the book.
Yeah, they really
Um,
are.
but
They
it's
really are.
interesting that you say you hear like the musical score and
Mhm.
everything, because
Mhm.
I would say that I definitely I see it and I can hear the dialogue, but I wouldn't say that I actually hear like the full orchestration. And so
Sure.
I remember reading an interview with Karen Kingsbury where it talked about how she, just is just literally typing away what she.
And
Sorry.
so
That's okay.
because my books, the setting is almost another character.
Okay, I'm gonna turn that off. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
How she sees like the entire music or the movie playing, and I was always like, "That's so weird." And then I realized, no, that's actually what I do. I just don't necessarily recognize it.
Right, and I don't think that a lot of us do recognize that, even if we're readers. That's really kind of what we're doing too, is we're playing it as a movie in our minds.
Yeah.
We're just not registering it as that. And we're not thinking about it as a movie per se, but it really is what our imagination is. It's just this constant going entertainment film thing in our heads.
Yeah. So you like to write Fast and Furious, but it's actually not really Fast and Furious because you've been stewing
right
several months on the book.
Correct.
It's just actually getting it out of your mind onto paper
is Fast
and Furious. That stewing.
Yes. Yep.
So you also talk about how there are seasons in the writing, because your first book won all the major awards. You won the Book of the Carol Award, you won the Christy Award, and it's very well deserved. And you've won lots of awards since then, but you talk about how you can't live in award lane. So what does that mean to you?
I think, and it makes me wonder sometimes too, what it's like in Hollywood when they win like an Oscar or something. Because I think there's this stigma of, oh, if you get the biggest awards, then your career is set and you'll always be wanted and you'll always have contracts. You'll always have the next movie or the next book or something. And, you can't live there because you can't let the quality of your work digress, because then people are like, what just happened? So from one standpoint, it's almost more pressure because you're like, oh, shoot, if the first book wins an award, then I can only go down from here. Right. And then you still have to, it sounds horrible, and I'm not going to say this in the right way, but in a sense, you still have to prove your worth and your value. One award for one book doesn't mean every single book is award worthy, or that every single book you write is actually good. And so you can't live in this false land that, hey, I won an award, so therefore I must be talented, so therefore I can relax and just assume everyone's going to love me and my books. You still have to work really hard at it, and you still have to, in a sense, continue to convince your publisher of your ideas, and you still have to sell books and you still have to work. And so award land is a great fun place to be, but it's like you can't live in the mountaintop. And I think it's really important too to stay humble and realize that it's a blessing, but it's not necessarily a given. And also for me, I've found that if you live in award land, sometimes you will start defining yourself and your worth by an award. And I have books that have come out, and most of my books have won an award, but some of them are really tiny. They're just small awards that, I recognize, the readers recognize, but, Publishers Weekly has no idea what these are, and so you can't, live there and just feel like, oh, if I don't win the big Christy Award, that I stink. Or let your value just drive you down. I think you write for the joy of it, you write for the ministry of it, you write for the entertainment of it, and you just have to continue to keep it alive.
And I love what you were talking about in how you can't, in a sense, rest on your laurels. And that's
right.
One of the things that I personally love about writing is that, 35, 36 books in, I still have areas I can improve on. I can still get better every book.
Absolutely.
And so I don't ever want it to be something that just gets dialed in and that readers are like, oh, this is the same book, the same hero, the same heroine. She just changed the names.
Right. Exactly. So wanting to keep everything fresh and keep everything going. and then not being defeated if for some reason it doesn't win an award, or if its sales are lower than the last book or something like that. You just never know what's going to resonate with people. And some books really do. Like I literally look at The House on Foster Hill and it's not the favorite of the ones I wrote. So it's just kind of funny that that's the one that won the Christy Award. And I don't, maybe it was because it was kind of a newer genre style too, that it kind of came out with a bang, or who knows what it was, but yeah, you keep going and you keep striving and learning.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know that the viewers were really enjoying it, and I appreciate your time. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, On the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor just came out, and it is so good. And perfect really for fall and for October.
Yeah, it's a good spooky read for that.
Yeah, it is. It's like perfect for the whole fall, Halloween, spooky season.
Yes.
But don't worry, if you don't like intense, you'll be fine. It's still really, really good.
I always say it's like Scooby-Doo, where it's scary, but it gets explained.
Exactly. That's a great way of explaining it. So, all right. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed getting to meet Jaime Jo and learn more about her books and her writing. And I hope you have a wonderful week.
Bye.